Danielle. We just closed on the yacht for Taylor's vlog. The money is tied up. That was my father's response when I called him begging for $12,000 to save my leg. I was sitting in a medic tent with my bone exposed, terrified I would lose my military career. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just sighed and said, "Use the pain to build character." Then hung up. In that split second, the pain in my leg disappeared, replaced by a cold, hard fact. To my own parents, I was worth less than a boat. Before I tell you how I took their boat, their house, and their freedom, drop a comment and let me know. What is the most unforgivable thing a family member has ever said to you? I read every single one. I didn't scream. Screaming uses energy, and I had none left to spare. I sat there in the medic tent, staring at the phone in my hand, dissecting my father's words like I was analyzing intel. We bought a boat. It wasn't just a rejection, it was a valuation. My ability to walk, my career in the military, my entire future was worth less to them than a fiberglass recreational vehicle for my sister's vlog. I took a breath, held it for 4 seconds, and exhaled for 4. Tactical breathing. It works for sniper fire. And apparently, it works for family betrayal. I looked at the physician assistant. She was already filling out the paperwork for a medical discharge. I knew what that meant. Without the surgery, the ligament wouldn't heal right. I'd be limping by Christmas and out of the service by New Year's. My life, the one I had built to escape the suffocating narcissism of my parents, was dissolving in real time. Then the tent flap opened. It wasn't a doctor, it was Jason. My brother looked out of place against the sterile canvas walls, his mechanic's jumpsuit stained with grease, his eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. He'd driven 4 hours straight after I texted him the news. He didn't say a word. He just walked over to the cot, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a thick, messy wad of cash. He pressed it into my good hand. It was $1,200 in 20s and 50s, smelling faintly of oil and old metal. I looked at him, confused. Jason barely made rent most months. He was the one who fixed things, the one who stayed quiet, the one our parents ignored because he worked with his hands instead of his image. "I sold the chest," he said, his voice rough. My stomach dropped. The snap-on tool chest. It wasn't just a box. It was 10 years of his life. It was his livelihood. It was the only thing he owned that had any real value. He had sold his future to try and save mine. "Jason, you can't," I whispered. "That's your job." "You walk," he said, cutting me off. "That's the job. I can turn wrenches with cheap tools. You can't run on a bad leg." He didn't ask for a repayment plan. He didn't ask me to sign a contract with 5% interest. He just gave me everything he had because he couldn't stand to see me fall. In that moment, the contrast was so sharp it drew blood. My parents had millions in assets and credit, yet they wouldn't part with a dime. My brother had nothing, and he gave me the world. I closed my hand around the cash. It wasn't enough to cover the surgery. The bill was $12,000, but it was enough to wake me up. I had been saving a settlement payout from a training accident 2 years ago. A safety net I swore I'd never touch unless it was life or death. I realized, looking at my brother's scarred hands, that this was it. I wasn't going to lose my leg, and I wasn't going to let Jason lose his tools forever. I used his money to pay the deposit. I used my settlement to pay the rest. I went under the knife 4 hours later. When I woke up, the pain was sharp and clean, the kind that heals. But as I lay there in the recovery room, listening to the beep of the monitor, I felt something else taking root in my chest. A cold, heavy resolve. My parents thought they had simply saved money on a bad investment. They didn't know they had just declared war. I didn't go home to recover. Home was a concept that had died in that medic tent. Instead, I went to the only place that made sense. My desk. I sat there in the quiet hum of the intel office, my leg propped up on a chair. Painkillers dulling the throb in my knee but sharpening the focus in my mind. My parents thought silence was a punishment. They hadn't called since the rejection. "No, how was the surgery? No, do you need groceries?" Just radio silence. Assuming I was somewhere suffering. Learning the lesson they thought I needed. But silence isn't a punishment for an analyst. It's an opportunity. I opened my laptop. I didn't need to hack their bank accounts. I didn't need to guess passwords or install spyware. People like my parents, people who live for the applause of an audience, leave trails everywhere. But the real truth is always buried in the boring stuff, the paperwork no one reads. I logged into the county clerk's public records portal. It's a free, legal database available to anyone with an internet connection and the patience to navigate a government website. I typed in my father's name. The screen refreshed, and the myth of my family's wealth evaporated in pixels. There it was, filed 28 days ago, a notice of default. They weren't just behind on the mortgage for the glass house, their lakefront mansion. They were drowning. The document listed the arrears. 4 months of missed payments. The bank had initiated pre-foreclosure proceedings. I kept scrolling. It got worse. There were 3 separate IRS tax liens filed against the property in the last 2 years. The successful business my father bragged about was bleeding cash, leveraged to the hilt. And yet, they had bought a boat. I sat back, the glow of the screen reflecting in my eyes. It didn't make sense mathematically. Why buy a luxury yacht when the bank is 30 days away from seizing your front door? Why refuse a $12,000 loan to save your daughter's leg, only to sign a 6-figure contract for a fiberglass vanity project? Then I understood. It wasn't a financial decision. It was a psychological survival mechanism. There is a specific kind of madness that infects the image-obsessed. It's called the wealth illusion. To people like David and Sarah, financial ruin isn't just a problem. It's a form of death. Being broke is shameful, but looking broke is fatal. When the walls start closing in, a rational person cuts costs. A narcissist spends more. They buy the boat not because they can afford it, but to prove to the world and themselves that they aren't sinking. The yacht wasn't a purchase. It was a disguise. It was a desperate, shiny shield held up to blind the neighbors so no one would see the foreclosure notice taped to the gate. My leg wasn't sacrificed for their financial security. It was sacrificed for their ego. They let me bleed because helping me offered no social currency. Saving a daughter happens in private. Buying a boat happens in public. I looked at the numbers again. The total debt was staggering $850,000 in distressed mortgages and loans. Most people would see a tragedy. I saw leverage. They were standing on a trapdoor, smiling for the camera, completely unaware that the latch was broken. All I had to do was reach up and pull it. I didn't storm the castle. I bought the mortgage. In the military, you learn that the best ambushes don't look like attacks. They look like opportunities. I formed a shell company, a faceless entity named Phoenix Holdings, LLC, and approached the bank holding my parents' distressed debt. Banks don't care about family drama. They care about their balance sheets. When I offered to buy the toxic loans on the house and the boat for a lump sum, they didn't ask why. They just asked for the routing number. Once the paperwork cleared, I owned everything. I owned the roof over their heads, the floorboards under their feet, and the ridiculous yacht docked at the marina. But ownership wasn't the goal. Eviction was. And to do that legally, quickly, and brutally, I needed them to walk into the trap themselves. I hired a lawyer to act as the face of Phoenix Holdings. Mr. Sterling was perfect for the role: silver hair, an expensive suit, and a voice that sounded like old money. I gave him a script designed specifically for a narcissist's ear. He wasn't there to offer charity. He was there to offer a strategic partnership. Sterling met my father at his favorite lunch club. I wasn't there, but I had the transcript. "Mr. Henderson," Sterling said, pouring the wine. "My client specializes in assisting high-net-worth individuals who are suffering from temporary liquidity issues. He admires your lifestyle management. He believes your brand has value." That was the key. He validated the lie. He told my father exactly what he wanted to hear. That he wasn't a failure drowning in debt, but a misunderstood genius just waiting for the right backer. The deal was a sale-leaseback agreement. Phoenix Holdings would pay off all the arrears, stopping the foreclosure instantly. In exchange, the title of the property would transfer to the company. My parents would remain in the house as tenants, paying a manageable monthly rent. To sweeten the pot, Sterling slid a black metal card across the table. "A corporate credit card," Sterling explained. $50,000 limit. For operational expenses to get your affairs back in order. My father's eyes reportedly lit up like a child's. He saw a lifeline. He saw free money. What he didn't see was the fine print. The contract contained a specific provision I had drafted myself. The moral hazard clause. It stated that the tenant's occupancy was conditional upon financial discipline. Specifically, any single personal luxury transaction over $500 charged to the corporate card would constitute a material breach of contract. The penalty wasn't a warning or a fee. It was immediate lease termination and a self-help eviction, governed by commercial lodging laws, not residential tenancy. Basically, if they spent money on toys instead of bills, they were trespassing. David didn't read it. Of course he didn't. Narcissists don't read contracts. They assume the rules will bend for them. He was too busy staring at the black card, already imagining the status it would buy him. He signed his name with a flourish, grinning at Sterling like they were old friends. I received the signed PDF in my inbox an hour later. I stared at his signature, the loops and curves so familiar, so arrogant. He thought he had just pulled off the deal of the century. He thought he had outsmarted the bank. He didn't know he had just handed the detonator to the daughter he left bleeding in a tent. The trap was set. Now, I just had to wait for them to get greedy. 3 weeks later, I was sitting at my desk reviewing satellite imagery when my phone buzzed against the hardwood. It wasn't a call. It was a push notification from the admin app for the Phoenix Holdings corporate credit card. I looked at the screen. The text was simple, clean, and absolutely lethal. Transaction approved. Chanel Boutique. Amount: $3,500. I didn't blink. I didn't gasp. I just leaned back in my chair and exhaled. Taylor. It had to be. My father was arrogant, but he wasn't interested in handbags. He had likely flashed the black card at dinner to show off his new partnership. And Taylor, seeing an opportunity to upgrade her wardrobe for her followers, had either charmed him into it or swiped it from his wallet. It didn't matter who swiped the card physically. The contract stated the cardholder was liable for all activity. The limit was $500. They had exceeded it by 7 times in a single swipe. Part of me, the old part, the sister who used to save her allowance to buy Taylor birthday presents she would ignore, wanted to call. I wanted to scream. To warn them. To tell them to return it before the charge posted. But that voice was a ghost. It belonged to a girl who thought love was about protecting people from their own stupidity. I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the landlord. I watched the screen. The transaction sat in pending for 2 hours. I drank my coffee. I finished my reports. I waited. Finally, the status flickered and changed to posted. The money was gone. The breach was official. The trap hadn't just sprung. It had crushed the bone. I stood up and walked to the printer. I didn't need to draft anything new. The documents were already waiting in my queue. Saved for this exact moment. Notice of lease termination. Notice of immediate eviction. Commercial trespass warning. The pages slid out of the tray, warm and crisp. I went to my closet and pulled out my Class A uniform. I brushed the lint off the jacket, aligned my ribbons, and polished my shoes until they looked like black glass. They had mocked my service. They had called me a government pawn. Today, I wanted them to see exactly who they were dealing with. I wasn't just their daughter coming for a visit. I was the authority coming for an inspection. I grabbed the file, checked my reflection, and walked out the door. The time for silence was over. The receptionist at the law firm looked up, startled by my uniform. I didn't stop. I walked past her, down the hall, and pushed open the heavy oak doors of the conference room. They were already there. David was leaning back in a leather chair, looking bored. Sarah was critiquing the complimentary coffee. Taylor was taking a selfie with the skyline view. They looked wealthy. They looked secure. They looked like people who had never been told no. David frowned when he saw me. He didn't see the uniform. He only saw the daughter he thought he owned. "Danielle?" he said, checking his watch. "You're late. And why are you dressed like that?" "We're waiting for the senior partner." "Sit down, David," I said. He froze. "Excuse me?" I said sit down. I didn't wait for him to process the shift in power. I plugged my phone into the presentation cable. The room dimmed, and the projector hummed to life. On the wall, 10 feet high, appeared the notification I had received that morning. Chanel Boutique. $3,500. Taylor looked up from her phone, squinting. "Hey, that's my receipt. Did you hack my account?" "Dad said it was fine. It's for the brand." "The contract said it wasn't," I replied, my voice steady. "You are in breach of the moral hazard clause." David laughed. It was a dry, dismissive sound. "Okay, fine. We'll return the bag. Don't be dramatic, Danielle. You can't evict us over a purse. We have tenant rights. State law requires 30 days' notice." I walked to the head of the table. "That's where you're wrong. You didn't sign a residential lease, David. You were too busy admiring your credit limit to notice the header. You signed a commercial lodging agreement. You aren't tenants. You are guests in a corporate facility. And checkout time was 10 minutes ago." I watched the realization hit him. It wasn't instant. It crept over his face like a shadow. "The locks have already been changed remotely," I continued. "Security is waiting in the lobby to escort you for personal items. The boat is currently being towed to the auction block." Taylor jumped up, her chair screeching against the floor. "You're ruining my life over a bag." "It's just a bag." I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the sister who had laughed while I bled. "And my leg was just a leg," I said. "Now we're even." David didn't scream. He didn't beg. He started laughing. It was a wet, ugly sound that bounced off the glass walls of the conference room. "You think you're smart, Danielle," he said, wiping tears of mirth from his eyes. "You think you can outmaneuver me? You're just a grunt. I'm the general." He pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. He didn't dial a lawyer. He dialed a number he had clearly memorized. He put it on speaker. "Department of Defense, Inspector General's office," a voice answered. "This is David Henderson," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with pure, distilled malice. "I have a whistleblower report regarding Sergeant Danielle Henderson." I have evidence that she has engaged in espionage and grand larceny involving classified funds. My blood ran cold. He wasn't trying to save the house. He was trying to burn me alive. She just purchased $850,000 of private debt, David continued, his voice smooth, confident. That money was stolen from my private offshore accounts. Accounts containing sensitive government contract proceeds that she accessed using her security clearance. He hung up and smiled. There. Now let's see how well you walk in federal prison. He had lied. He had fabricated a crime so severe it would trigger an immediate freeze on my entire life. But before I could speak, the door opened. 2 men in dark suits stepped in. They weren't lawyers. They were CID, Criminal Investigation Division. They didn't look at David. They looked at me. Sergeant Henderson, the lead agent said. We received a tip regarding your financial activities. I need your badge and your CAC card. Immediately. My sister smirked, pulling out her phone to record. My mother finally looked at me, not with pity, but with relief that someone else was taking the fall. I stood up. I didn't resist. I placed my badge on the mahogany table. It made a hollow clack, the sound of my career hitting the wall. David leaned back, triumphant. He thought he had just checkmated me. He thought he had destroyed my credibility to save his own skin. He had no idea he had just walked into the kill box. I sat in the interrogation room for 4 hours. It was cold, sterile, and familiar. I didn't panic. I presented my evidence. The settlement check from my injury 2 years ago. My savings records. The clean paper trail of Phoenix Holdings. My money was legal. It was clean. The agent reviewed the file. He looked at me, then at the transcript of my father's call to the Inspector General. Your father claims this money is his, the agent said. He stated on a recorded federal line that you stole $850,000 from his hidden offshore accounts. I know, I said. He was lying to hurt me. The thing is, the agent said, a small, grim smile touching his lips. We cross-referenced his claim with his bankruptcy filings from last year. He swore under oath he had 0 assets. I nodded. This was the perjury trap. David wanted to destroy me so badly that he claimed ownership of the money. By doing so, he officially confessed to the IRS and the bankruptcy court that he had hidden nearly $1 million in assets. It didn't matter that the money wasn't actually his. His confession was real. He had admitted to federal bankruptcy fraud and perjury in an attempt to frame a federal employee. The agents didn't arrest me. They arrested him. I walked out of the building just in time to see my father being escorted into a federal vehicle, handcuffs gleaming under the streetlights. He saw me. He opened his mouth to scream, but the door slammed shut. Sarah was evicted the next morning. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment paid for by the state. Taylor tried to spin the story on her vlog, crying about being a victim of a corrupt system. I responded by posting a single image. The receipt for the Chanel bag, time-stamped 3 weeks after they claimed poverty. The caption read, $3,500 for a handbag while her parents were homeless. The internet didn't pity her. They devoured her. She deleted her account 6 hours later. I had one stop left to make. I drove to the edge of town, to the mechanic shop where the sign was peeling and the lights buzzed. Jason was under a lift, working on a sedan that had seen better days. He looked up when I walked in, wiping grease onto a rag. Heard about Dad, he said quietly. Is it true? It's true. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. I placed it on his workbench, right next to his cheap, mismatched wrenches. What's this? He asked. Open it. He opened the flap. Inside was the deed to the building we were standing in. Paid in full. And a receipt for a delivery arriving tomorrow. A complete, Master Series snap-on tool chest. I bought the shop, Jason, I said. It's yours. He stared at the paper. His hands, scarred and stained, began to shake. He looked at me, eyes wide, struggling to process the shift in his universe. Why? He choked out. Because you sold your tools for me, I said. And nobody messes with my mechanic, he cried then. Ugly. Heaving sobs that echoed off the concrete floors. I didn't cry. I just stood there, watching him, feeling the final weight lift off my shoulders. I walked out into the sunlight. My leg didn't hurt. My limp was gone. My family was gone. And for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't lonely. It was free. My father thought he was playing 4D chess, but he forgot he was playing against the person who writes the rules. If you've ever had to save yourself, because no one else would, share this story. And if you're still waiting for an apology that will never come, stop waiting. Start planning.